Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome back to the Grayzone. We're going to be covering a lot of territory today. First, we're going to discuss the double earthquakes in Venezuela and the repercussions throughout the region. And it looks like we will be joined by our Shield of the Americas team, Anya Parampil and Oscar Leon, to discuss that. Then we're going to move on to Lebanon, where Wyatt Reed is stationed in Beirut and has been in the south, actually close enough to see Israeli military activity 500 meters away. Then we will move to occupied Britain to discuss the fall of Keir Starmer. And then we're going to wrap up with the unhinged Zionist meltdown over a handful of DSA-backed candidates winning in New York and the Iran Memorandum of Understanding being signed. That'll be fun. Aaron Mate will join us then. But right now we're going to welcome in my very close colleague, Anya Parampil. Welcome, Anya.
Hello.
And our Ecuadorian native informant and exceptional editor, Oscar Leon.
Hey, Oscar. Good to see you.
Let's go, Ecuador.
Oh, what's up? Yeah. When's that happening?
Yesterday, we defeated Germany. Only the third South American team to defeat Germany ever.
Awesome. I'm like so in and out of it with the World Cup.
That was an incredible victory. Somehow the Ecuadorian team was not cursed by Daniel Noboa. And it's an interesting team. You told me many of the players are descendants of the Quilombos.
Oh, that's a crazy story. You know, they are descendants. A lot of them are from the Chota area, which is like an area in the mountains, a valley in the mountains. And they were originally the descendants of slaves that their ship sank, and only some of the slaves survived. You know, the sinking. So those who survived created a colony in what's now Esmeraldas. And eventually when the Spaniards and civilization, quote unquote, catch up to that area, they escaped and moved into the mountains and created a colony in El Chota area where most of the players you see playing, you know, by Ecuador are from. And those are black people from the mountains that were never slaves. So they have a deep tradition, you know, of a lot of things in their own culture.
That's some amazing history about that team, which I wouldn't have known if we're not in contact with you. We're going to discuss how Ecuador fits into the puzzle of the emerging Don Road Doctrine, which is essentially a doctrine of total U.S. military control over the continent. First, Anya, double earthquakes hit Venezuela. This is a rare occurrence. There are hundreds dead. Many may be trapped under the rubble, partly because of a lack of heavy equipment. And this seems to be an opportunity for the U.S. military to deepen its infiltration of Venezuela after kidnapping the legitimate president of Venezuela, Nicolas Maduro, and his wife, Celia Flores. This is a video from Southcom that put out. Southcom supporting Department of State-led rescue efforts following the earthquakes that struck the nation of Venezuela. And they're playing some cheesy music. All right, well, we get the point. Anya, what happened in Venezuela? Why is this politically significant and not just a natural disaster of an ordinary natural disaster?
Looking at those images, it's pretty sad because honestly, considering the catastrophe in Venezuela, which is a true catastrophe, mainly centered around La Guaira, the capital city of La Guaira state, next to the capital district of Caracas. Devastation there, from what I understand, is quite bad. Hundreds of buildings collapsed, and sanctions having prevented the government from purchasing the heavy machinery needed to respond to this catastrophe have led to the fact that, you know, people have been trapped under the rubble for days until now, with this aid coming in from Ecuador and Colombia, El Salvador, and Mexico, they weren't even really able to move the rubble and begin to rescue people. So I'm sure if there were people that could have been saved in those initial hours, just because of U.S. sanctions alone, hundreds, if not thousands of people died just because the government was unable to make a response. But watching that video from the United States, on one hand, yes, under these circumstances, as an American, I'm happy to see that my government is going to support Venezuela in theory. Unfortunately, this isn't just your average humanitarian response. This is, again, coming in because the state itself has been cut off from the rest of the world and unable to provide for itself. As a result of this catastrophe, it looks like, oh, this is a failure of the government. Now the U.S. can come in with these other competent Latin American states and run the show. And that's really what it looks like they're planning to do, especially considering the U.S. was already coordinating military strikes on sovereign Venezuelan territory before this catastrophe even took place. So it definitely looks like an opportunity for the United States and its allies to entrench their presence in Venezuela. And while regional solidarity should be something that we celebrate or find inspiring, instead it just feels like it's a manipulation tactic to do a soft further regime change, which they've pretty much been carrying out since Maduro was removed from office on January 3rd.
Yeah, it's a means of turning Venezuela further into a U.S. military base, since we saw the very provocative V-22 Osprey landing at the new U.S. embassy. The U.S. embassy had voluntarily left. And before that, in January 2009, during Israel's quote unquote Operation Cast-led assault on the Gaza Strip, which was the first really devastating assault that led up to the current genocide, Venezuela's then president, Hugo Chavez, expelled the Israeli ambassador and all of his staff in protest and never brought them back. And from that point on, the Venezuelan government was in conflict with Israel, and they treated Iran like a normal country. They treated the Islamic Republic of Iran as a normal country, and Iran helped them under sanctions a lot. And now this is happening under the cover of earthquake aid. Israel is sending teams into Venezuela. I assume these include intelligence officers and military-like officials. Jewish and Israeli aid rescue organizations are preparing to send teams, according to E-Jewish Philanthropy. The Israeli government also said it was preparing to send an aid delegation. The foreign ministry is holding a situational assessment with the relevant figures in Israel and is determining ways to help. So, the first time, Anya, you and I ever saw Delcy Rodriguez was at the People's Assembly meeting in Caracas, and she was wearing a kufiya. And now, under her leadership, Israel is getting a toehold back in Venezuela, which I assume will deepen. And then we'll talk about Colombia next. But what are your thoughts?
It's definitely shocking to see the Israelis set foot in Venezuela. It's hard to say under such circumstances what any other leader would do, because they obviously need help. But it would have been thought in previous years, perhaps, that would be a red line. And I just want to say also that La Guaira, where this catastrophe, this earthquake, this double earthquake, at first a 7.2 on the Richter scale, followed by a 7.5 seconds later, just absolutely terrifying. I don't know if anybody's ever been in smaller earthquakes, but if they're a 4, they're pretty scary to be a part of. And so I can't imagine what it would be like to go beyond 7. And so they went through that twice, which is very rare. And earthquake of that magnitude hasn't been detected in Venezuela for over a century. So, but this area, La Guaira, was also the site of a catastrophe in 1999 when floodwaters brought on by a terrible storm caused the coast essentially to collapse. And there were huge landslides, mudslides that killed up to 10 to 30,000 people. Some people, bodies were never recovered. They were buried under the mud, swept out into the sea. And that was initially, the numbers, the death toll from that is way higher than anything that is officially predicted now in Venezuela. And so Venezuela, the same elements that are its greatest blessing, which give it its oil and its iron ore and its gold and its resources, these fault lines are also, and its place in the world are also its greatest curse, because it has led to these natural disasters that really devastate the country at times. And now, under this government, have created a situation where the U.S. military that has been kept out for so long might now be able to gain a foothold, intensify its place and its ability to control the country, and then the U.S. by default might get its hands on some of those resources.
And prior to this earthquake, there was something else we had yet to we'd never seen in Venezuela, but we had seen it on January 3rd, actually, when the U.S. attacked, sent in special forces teams and abducted Maduro and Celia Flores, killed Cuban officers, about 30 of them, killed many Venezuelan civilians. Some 70 Venezuelan civilians were killed. But now, in supposed coordination with the Venezuelan government, the U.S. has conducted strikes in Venezuelan territory. This is the video that the U.S. put out, showing them bombing the compound of someone named Nino Guerrero, who is a supposed leader of Tren de Aragua, which was classified by the U.S. Department of Justice as a narco-terrorist organization, despite it having really extinguished its, been weakened over the years, and had its central base at a major maximum security prison in Venezuela raided by Maduro. This was supposedly a coordinated assault on Venezuelan territory by the U.S. military in a region in which the U.S., the Trump administration, is seeking control over gold mines to basically make more gold to coat the walls of Mar-a-Lago, presumably. What does this say? And I'll ask. I want to know what Oscar, what you think, because you covered the same phenomenon in Ecuador. But Anya, I mean, what do you think about this raid?
I think
we'll go.
I think you should go to Oscar. Yeah.
Okay, Oscar. Yeah, I mean, you produced a piece for us on the raid by the Ecuadorian military with U.S. military support, where they said they were attacking a narco-terror base on the Colombian border, and it turned out to be a peasant farm. You actually interviewed one of the community leaders. So, I mean, do you see a similarity here by what's happening in Venezuela with what's happening in Venezuela?
I cannot help but seeing now, when picture in my head Pete Hegseth with his map of the greater North America behind him.
Yeah.
You know, and I can see in my mind that security perimeter. And like, if you look inside of there, a lot of things are happening, some of them very weird. And a lot of that is the lawfare, of course, but the other is what I see as false positives. They're using that doctrine of counterinsurgents that, I think it originated before Vietnam, but it was certainly used in Vietnam and in other countries. They're not trying to find out the particulars of a crime or nothing. They're just trying to get names and numbers in a list, so in that perspective, that's what you see all over the place. You see that in Ecuador now, you see it in the Caribbean, in Colombia, and a lot of the logic they use
started with the boats,
creating false positives.
Yeah, it started with the boat strikes in September of 2025, and you could see the targets of the boat strikes were poor people, fishermen, sometimes carrying marijuana, sometimes cocaine, making side money. It was like a side hustle for them. These were not major narco traffickers. Sometimes they're just fishermen fishing, and their bodies would wash up on the shore. And now it's moving inland into South America, and it continues to be a war on the poor by figures like Daniel Noboa. And now you have the election of Abelardo de Espriella, the El Tigre in Colombia, who is like a kind of cartoonish version of Bukele, who has all kinds of plastic surgery and boasted about, putting firecrackers up cats' asses when he was a kid. He is just a buffoonish character with guns all over his house. His opponent, Ivan Cepeda, the leftist, was like a philosophy professor. Abelardo, he's like a cartoon of the US-backed right-wing leader who is backed heavily by Trump. And so it appears that this doctrine is now going to spread back to Colombia, which was the original kind of base, the Israel of South America, as Evo Morales put it, the base of Plan Colombia. It's going full circle, but with, I think, greater power of these pro-Israel, US-backed right-wing forces across Latin America. Paint us a broader picture of the continent following the Colombian election, and give us and what is your take on Gustavo Petro's claim that the election was rigged? I guess two questions in one, but we're pressed for time.
I think that Latin America now it's like a protectorate of United States. Unofficial, maybe. It's pretty evident right now that it's been taking control in every country, and I'm pretty sure that intelligence agencies and the media, and there's a formula to take power. That's been repeated over and over, and now this Colombia is the last iteration of it. We see the media spinning certain types of narratives, and at the same time you have the judicial branches spinning cases whenever they can to target specific leaders. It's pretty scary in a way, because all those elections have had serious questions and that are unanswered about fraud. For example, we didn't finish a report on Ecuador because of time, and I can't remember why, but it was pretty clear that there had been, if not a general fraud, instances of fraud, like in very prepared instances. For example, the paper in the ballot for the Ecuadorian ballot was transferable. So if you vote in the one candidate and then they fold it in a specific way, the ink will transfer to the other side of the paper. And this was like forensically they verify that forensically. So in Colombia, you have instances where the users, which is rare, that they have access to see the paper ballots, And because of that, they were able to start picking up that there are a lot of inconsistencies. And obviously, in all of these cases, you have to understand that both, for example, in Ecuador and Colombia as well, the electoral authority is in the hands of them, the extreme right. So they control and call all the shots. In Colombia, it's pretty obvious, but in Ecuador, Ecuador is like if Colombia is a cartoon, Ecuador is like a cartoon, a joke, like however you want to put it, of the banana republic that has no democracy. All the powers of the state are mixed into one figure. So, and that figure is ruling in the interest of a foreign country. That's Ecuador. You have Daniel Noboa, who is a U.S. citizen, who can legally never say no to the United States, or he can go to jail for treason, and he cannot say no to any U.S. representative because he's a U.S. citizen. He swore allegiance to the U.S. flag first and above everything else, and that's a conflict of interest that was pointed out in the Colombian elections. Somebody actually presented a notary, a paper saying, he has a conflict of interest because what I just said, he's a U.S. U.S. citizen. Abelardo, if you think about it, Abelardo swore an oath to the U.S. flag first, because I know that because I did myself too. You swear an oath to the U.S. for your allegiance to be first to the United States and then anything else, or you can go to jail for a long time. So to be a president of a country and be a U.S. citizen is in itself incompatible.
Hey, he's a billionaire son of Miami from an oligarchic family who is also very plausibly accused of being at the head of a narco-trafficking empire, which we'll discuss in a second. And Noboa also played a big role in the Colombian election. He threatened 100% tariffs on Colombian goods if they did not elect El Tigre, Abelardo de la Espriella, and along with Trump and Senator Bernie Moreno, a billionaire Colombian-American huckster who went down and campaigned for Abelardo, they eked out a victory. This is, I just want to get one more, turn to Anya one more time on this. This is the new president of Colombia. And what is in his first act since being elected, he pledges loyalty to Israel. Got no volume.
Y es un orgullo. Ustedes no saben lo que yo un placer estar aquí.
He goes to a synagogue in Colombia. The Colombian Jewish community is like 1% of the population. It's not there aren't that many Jews in Colombia like there are in Argentina, for example.
Right.
Ustedes no saben
But he still,
lo que yo
this is his
quiero a esta
priority.
comunidad. Porque el pueblo judío
Jewish
es el
people are
pueblo de
God's
Dios.
people, he says.
En
I will
defender
never
al pueblo
hesitate to
judío que es
defend the
nuestro
Jewish
pueblo,
people,
hermano. El
who are our
pueblo de
brothers and
Dios.
sisters,
Y
God's
con la
people.
ayuda de ustedes, con la bendición de Dios, vamos
We will work
juntos
together to
a
save and
salvar
rebuild
y a
Colombia.
reconstruir a
Insane.
Colombia. No vamos a dejar que una minoría que quiere
We will
incendiar
not
el
let a minority that wants to set the country ablaze. He's referring to like a portion of Colombians who
Yeah.
voted for his opponent
país
Eda,
y acabar
and
con
destroy
los
the means
medios
of
de
production,
producción
ruin
destruya
Colombia.
Colombia. Los vamos a enfrentar en democracia y estamos
You're
dispuestos a
prepared
defender
to
a
defend
Colombia
Colombia by reason or force. So he's already threatening like armed repression of the left.
por la razón o por la fuerza.
He's choosing a Jewish audience to, using Jews basically as human shields and
Well, they
collaborators.
support him.
Yeah, well, the Jews of Colombia are very.
Did they not give him
right-wing.
money?
Gracias.
Thank you, and long live the people of Israel. Okay, so Anya, what's
I
going
mean,
on?
it's an influential, looks like a pretty influential, wealthy community, probably similar to Venezuela, but a very small minority. I don't know. Delcy Rodriguez, she had initially, when Maduro was removed, said that the activity in Venezuela had a Zionist tinge, but she since then kind of backed away, hasn't really said anything more about that. She released a Passover message to, again, a small group of a minority in Venezuela, something Maduro, other presidents had never done. And she was pretty silent all throughout the war on Iran, which was kind of surprising, I think, from people that are used to hearing a lot from Venezuela when it comes to the Middle East. But then again, from a strategic perspective, maybe maybe that's for the best. If Venezuela is trying to make business deals with interests that don't want the state speaking strongly about another region, people could make the argument that she's being pragmatic. But I don't know. What do you think, Oscar? Why is there this obsession with Israel amongst the right? I mean, in Argentina, it makes a little bit more sense because there are such influential actors there that are Jewish and Zionist. But I mean,
Milei's taken it to another level by basically joining Chabad and declaring himself Jewish. He's gone even further than anyone.
Yeah.
I'm gonna project a little bit of based on what we saw in the Honduras Gate, for example. In the Honduras Gate, it was stated by Juan Orlando Hernandez himself that his release, let's remember he was in jail for narco trafficking. They have investigated him for 10 years and he was solid in jail. He was not going out anytime soon. But Trump took money from Israel, from some rabbis, and released him, put him in charge of the Honduras Gate, which, that's how we know it. I don't know their name for that plan, but he put him in charge, and he said specifically to the president of Honduras, the current president of Honduras, that he's going to be the next president in behalf of Trump. He says that Trump is going to stay there for longer than his terms. And when asked, it's like, how do you know? He's like, don't worry about it. Just take my word for it. I know. And then he's going to say that they're going to use violence to control the left. That's the plan, like a new plan Condor, right? But the most important thing he said there, in my opinion, is that is Israel behind his release. It's some rabbis, he said. So if we fast forward to Colombia, in Colombia you have some figure called Hacker de la Fiscalía. Is a hacker, who who released some documents earlier and was supposed to release documents, very important documents about the paramilitary in Abelardo before the election. But I'm not sure why, how he did not. But among those releases that he did release, or the statements he put out based on these recordings, of paramilitaries and high-level discussions, they also said there that Israel is behind that camp. And it's important, this is his words, not mine, but he said that Israel is behind the right in Latin America and is using the narco trafficking world to finance that political takeover of the continent. So there's that. There's also the fact that there's growing
big.
colonies everywhere, right?
Yeah, and it's a way into the heart.
There's there's what everywhere?
Colonies that are established, for
Israeli
example,
colonies.
Yes, Israel colonies. For example, in New California, I understand there's an area that's being developed there that's like a little,
they buy the land,
minus state that they have.
They're everywhere.
Control over. They're everywhere. There's in Costa Rica as well.
I've seen, Israelis even up in Nicaragua.
There's Nicaragua and El Salvador, I understand, of course. And obviously in Argentina, as you were saying, Argentina is a whole new level of this. Like recently, Menem's son, who is Martin Menem, I talk about President Menem's son.
Carlos Menem was the former president of Argentina who was of Lebanese descent, right?
Yeah, and he took over the Peronist country and did a neoliberal plan that caused the original, like before this wave of poverty and privatizations. It was because they lost the war to England, the Malvinas War. They were under sanctions and whatnot, and it was Menem who reopened Argentina and redid the deals with them. And in those deals that he made, he delivered the country to corporations and in other states. So this second round of giving up Argentina to foreign powers taking place right now, the son, Martin Menem, traveled to Israel and signed up for the delivery of the 100,000 acres that we had reported on. That was, a rumor at the time. Now it's all signed.
Wow.
So you have a number of laws and measures. For example, if you're an Israeli in Argentina now, you will be able to retire and get a check from the state, from the same state that is killing its own people by not having money, for hospitals or, education or the elderly. Is eugenics plan in a way.
Yeah.
And that same government implementing that eugenics plan is the one that's going to be handing money to Israeli veterans and citizens to go and move into
like
Argentina.
White replacement theory, but applied to Argentina.
Yes, it's not, especially because Argentina is so nationalistic. It's so centered in its own culture that it surprised me. They're so proud, that it surprised me that they were able to fall for this and allow this, but I guess it's the same plan that is in Ecuador and everywhere. You make everybody really poor and need and get them in debt and owe you, and then you own, and next thing you know, it's all gone.
It happens without people even knowing. If people don't,
Yes.
there's like no democracy. It's like the data centers in the United States. One day you just wake up and they're all over and nobody even knows how it happened. That's like the Israelis in Latin America. They just suddenly are there and in controlling the governments. It's very bizarre. So it sounds like someone should write a book about this.
I'm writing a documentary that we talk with Max. It's called Third World Democracy Handbook, which is that we compare what I learned about the third world as and to the United States, to what we see here. It's narrowing. It's incredible. And the last part that I was writing is that in Ecuador, in other countries, Colombia, in all these countries, you see people ruling in behalf of foreign powers. You see Novoa ruling in behalf of the United States. Here in the United States, now we see that.
Yeah.
We see Trump ruling in behalf
Exactly.
of Israel.
Exactly. Yeah. And then you have in Argentina, you're saying Israelis actually getting state benefits. It's kind of like it's like a global takeover, a global Zog. Oh boy, Max, you should say bye to me before this gets.
I don't know if you guys have seen this video. I sent it to Max, but I
We
never
say that
really followed
ironically,
up.
and Anya has I know you said you had a hard stop, but you keep going.
Sorry, but it was just real quick. It's a video where Netanyahu is showing a map of the countries that they are now controlling, and he's forecasting that soon they will be able to sanction those who try to sanction them.
Yeah,
Like
I won't surprise. Doesn't surprise me.
The takeover is global for sure.
So
Peace, guys.
yeah, Anya does have a hard stop here, and we really appreciate her joining us virtually online. It's rare for me to see her virtually online, and not in person. Oscar, we have Wyatt waiting in the wings, but I had one more question for you. And I also just wanted to make a quick point, which is there is a precedent of Israeli involvement in Colombia under President Virgil Barco in 1986. He brought in the former director of the Mossad, Rafi Eitan, to lead a program to exterminate the left, to exterminate and destroy the Patriotic Union Party. And thousands were killed. Rafi Eitan also, was involved in Latin America through the Mossad kidnapping of Adolf Eichmann, the director of the Nazi Office of Jewish Affairs, who kept the trains running on time, and abducted him, took him back to Jerusalem. But Rafi Eitan came back into Colombia and oversaw one of the worst war crimes and atrocities that the continent had seen. We're talking about over 3,000 party members who were exterminated. So it's not like we're just drawing this all out of we're extrapolating on the basis of comments made by Colombia's incoming president. But I wanted to ask you about one other issue in Ecuador, and we're gonna have a report out about this soon. But this a lot of threads are coming together based on what we've been reporting from Ecuador and what you've been reporting about the narco trafficking connections of Daniel Noboa, who was the shipping director for the Noboa family trading company, which just keeps their packaging of Bonita bananas, which is they own Bonita. That's the source of their major source of their fortune. Those packages keep showing up in Europe, particularly filled with packets of cocaine. And it's one of the main ways that cocaine gets into Europe. And now a whistleblower who is investigating Noboa, the president's family business, was murdered. Monica Silva Kanushek died from a blow to the head and strangulation, a postmortem found, despite government claim of suicide. So what happened here, and what does it say about the president of Ecuador potentially being the narco trafficker that, for example, exiled investigative reporter Augustin Duran claimed he was?
This is
and as quickly as possible, because we got to get to Wyatt.
Yeah, this is a very scary case in a way, because you see many things interacting here. You can see intelligence agencies benefiting from this politically. You see the fact that the laundering of dollars is possible because Ecuador is a dollarized country that has no controls. So it's like a paradise for laundering money, getting it back in the system. And it's important to understand that you cannot buy drugs with credit cards or checks. You can only buy drugs with cash. What does that mean? That the cash, day after day, week after week, month after month, exits the legal system, exits. And if you start quanting, and understanding how much that ends up being through the years, you understand that the system has to deal with the mafia or whoever it is to bring that cash back into the system. So there's an alliance, is a way to work between states and banks and the mafia and the drug money. So the problem here is that the way that investigations have not been carried out, because if I'm a big shipper of bananas, it's possible that somebody put some coke in one of my shippings one or twice, maybe, right? But if it happens one and it happens to me and I'm a political figure, I'm gonna lose my mind. I'm gonna send the army or whoever it is to really make sure it doesn't happen again, and I'm gonna make sure it's investigated to the last drop of blood. But that's not what we see here. We see some insane and obvious, abundant complicity between the state and these specific figures that are in this, network, if you will. So even though it's hard to definitely point out to President Noboa being in charge of this, there are enough indications in there, in the investigations, and also the absence of those investigations, in the way the law is concluded to some, and in other cases nothing happens. So in the case of Monica Silva, this goes beyond this. This goes to local corruption as well, that was growing and turning into bigger cases, bigger cases, bigger cases. She started taking care of the turtles in the beach, taking care of the community, that making sure they have water. And so she started a process of years of fighting, and every time with bigger cases. So weeks before her death, she delivered a folder with all the evidence of the Noboa trading case to the U.S. Embassy. It's important to say that the last person who tried to do that didn't end up well. It was the mayor of Guayaquil, the second largest city actually the largest city of Ecuador. He went in TV and said that he's found out who's behind the narco trafficking in the ports, because that's where the entire thing happens. Like, if they wanted to stop this, they will just militarize the ports, which is what Villavicencio wanted to do, by the way, and then he got killed weeks after.
The anti-corruption presidential candidate Fernando Villavicencio, who was
Correct.
assassinated by cartels as he campaigned for president. That's who you're referring to.
Yes, we did a report, and it's unclear who's behind that, but it's kind of,
it's kind of obvious.
Yes, he wanted to militarize the ports, and he was an enemy of Daniel Noboa. Daniel Noboa told him that he's a bad enemy, and he's going to be his worst nightmare. And weeks after, he died. So could be a coincidence. Who knows? But in this case, Monica Silva, was growing into the cases. So first smaller cases that grew to largest authorities. So for example, she found a really heavy corruption scandal for one of the Noboa's main ministers. And another example, the comptroller of the country sued her because she was denouncing corruption, among which she said that same controller had a lot of his relatives and family working in the state in specific, after Noboa was elected, in exchange of favors, stuff like that. So he sued her. So it's unusual that an activist that's in defense of defending the community, it's against corruption, it's pro-nature, is persecuted by the state. It's, she started getting death threats, and this is important to say. She was specific to who she thought the death threats came from, and it was not Noboa's camp necessarily. But then again, who knows? That's out there, so everybody knows that they're gonna get the blame, if you will. So it's unclear who did it, but there are specific, suspects that she herself. And one of those was the government. She said that if anything happens to her, it's the government's fault. And it is, because she got death threats. She went in a podcast, told about it. So the entire country knew she was threatened. Then she went and talked to a judge. She put, all the proper channels to get protection. And she was never protected by the state. Like, not at all. And you will think, that's a beneficial person for the Ecuadorian society, somebody who's fighting for the community and against corruption, should be protected by the state. But this is what my conclusion of this whole entire thing is that she was born in Poland. She grew up in Poland, and she traveled around the world before falling in love of the town of Montañita, where I used to live when I was young. She thought in her head that Ecuador should live in a state of law, in a state where you have actual law. In her head, thought that should be the case, and that maybe was the case. And the reason you don't see Ecuadorian activists as brave as her, as active as her, is because the Ecuadorians in their head, they know exactly how things work, and they know exactly that there's no law, there's no state of law, there's no fairness in the law. It's just corruption, flat out corruption. So for her, eventually, I talked to some of her closest friends, and they told me that she was actually depressed, which is something that the minister said and didn't make sense in his words, because he was trying to use that say that she suicided, which she's not going to do, because she had two daughters, so she was never going to do that. But she was depressed and sad because nobody helped her. she tweeted at some point that the press, like the journalists, failed her, that she didn't want a report post-mortem, that she wanted the press to help her in life to change stuff, and she did not receive that kind of help because the press, the journalism, the media, it's about and paid for, for with very reasonable exceptions, but for the most part. So
she died from a blow to the head after after the government said suicide, after pursuing the Noboa narco trafficking file, handing it over to the U.S. Embassy. Reminds me a lot of Berta Cáceres in Honduras, and those who were basically behind the Honduras coup and emerged from it have now been reinstituted into power by Trump. And
mind you,
we got to get Wyatt on, so we have to wrap up now.
Just to your point, Juan Orlando Hernandez was in control of that process.
Yeah.
Yeah, he ended up being in jail for narco trafficking. So this relation between fighting the left and the intelligence agencies and narco traffic is there.
Yep. The parallels are extreme. We could talk about this for the next 2 hours, but we're going to be featuring some new reports from you, Oscar, at the Grayzone on this very instance and on the new president of Colombia. So thanks a lot for joining us. Great seeing you. We're going to bring in Wyatt right now, Wyatt Reed from Beirut, Lebanon, who's been covering the continued Israeli assault in southern Lebanon. Wyatt, welcome to the stage. Sorry to keep you waiting.
No worries, Max. Good to see you.
Yeah, you too. So let's just talk about your latest. Well, I wanted to discuss your latest report from the South, but I think we can get into that. Just give us a briefing on what's happened since then. In the last week, we've just learned that Israel and Lebanon meaning the authorities who have very little mandate to do this and are violating the Lebanese constitution, have signed a framework agreement marking the beginning of formal cooperation talks. Israel continues to bombard the South. Just bring us up to date on what's happening.
Yeah, so the big news tonight is that they have finally signed this framework agreement that is being touted in the United States by Secretary of State Marco Rubio and in Israel by Netanyahu as this wonderful new development.
Kind of lost Wyatt's
of what many people have been expecting, which is that basically the Lebanese government, if you even want to use that term, is just rolling over and giving Israel everything that it wants. What does it want? Well, it wants to maintain its occupation of southern Lebanon indefinitely. And that is a gift that was just handed to this nationalist government. It's a complete surrender. Effectively, it allows Israel to continue occupying indefinitely the entire so-called yellow line zone and more and beyond. And the Israelis have made it very clear. Netanyahu, since this news was announced, has publicly stated that they will occupy this security zone in Lebanon for, quote, as long as Hezbollah does not disarm. So indefinitely, right? Because Hezbollah has made it clear, painfully clear over and over and again, that they're not going to unilaterally disarm while huge swaths of the South are militarily occupied by foreign invaders. So this means basically that the Lebanese government has offered an invitation. They have basically signed over swaths of the South to the Israelis and said, hey, they're basically rolling out the welcome mat for them. The framework agreement has some kind of stipulations about these so-called pilot zones where ostensibly Hezbollah will disarm and then hand over control of the territory to the Lebanese army. And we've already sort of seen what happens when they try to do this. The Lebanese army will come in and then they get killed by Israel. They get shelled or struck with drones or missiles, including even high level sort of commanders in the Lebanese army. So, you know, I think we all kind of know where this goes. It goes to, again, a formalization of the occupation.
And for the Lebanese authorities who are in power, it's a means for them to weaken their opponent by using the Israeli military by proxy, to not just weaken their opponent but to attack the community, the constituency of Hezbollah, which is the largest parliamentary faction in Lebanon's parliament. It's just pure cowardice. Here's something you filmed today in Dahia, showing the reaction of Hezbollah's constituency on the 10th day of Muharram, and is it the first day of Ashura?
It's the day of Ashura. That's right. Yeah. So the day in which Imam Hussein confronted a death. He was the grandson of the Prophet Muhammad, and he refused to cow before the tyrannical leader Yazid, the Caliph Yazid, and basically a very unpopular early Islamic leader who was the first to interrupt this somewhat democratic system called Shura, and he was appointed basically directly as a successor because of who his father was. He was the first hereditary monarch. So represented not just a regression in terms of kind of a more democratic system. He was also lived a very lavish, sort of degenerate lifestyle. He demanded loyalty oaths. Dissenters were crushed under his rule. And if any of that sounds familiar, you know, you may be living in the United States or any of one of its vassal states. But, you know, so he faced this certain death along with 72 of his followers. They knew they would die, but they would die for something that mattered, and their legacy would live on. And the famous phrase was "never to humiliation," and that is something I think the Israelis, it's quite likely they deliberately timed this. What this framework agreement is a massive humiliation for Lebanon in general, but specifically for the Shia Muslims, who today is the holiest day of the calendar for.
And so the confrontation will continue in the south, and Israel needs to continue the confrontation for political reasons. First, to attack the memorandum of understanding signed by Trump, between Trump and Iran through Pakistan. Lebanon is mentioned 3 times in the MOU. And so as long as Israel is escalating in Lebanon, the MOU is imperiled, and an Iranian response is possible. Then you have Netanyahu's political peril that he faces at home. He needs to be at war, but at the same time, Israel continues to lose soldiers. It has failed to capture the Ali al-Tahrir Hill, which is sort of this strategic Hezbollah fortress, which Israel actually built in the 1990s. And here's Israel Katz, Israel's unhinged defense minister, declaring that the IDF won't withdraw from southern Lebanon, even if there's an American demand. And, you know, the Americans should demand that they leave because it's in the MOU. What happens now?
Well, I think we go right back to where we started, which is the Strait of Hormuz remains closed. There's a concepts of a deal, as Trump might say, right? But there's nothing firm here. And when you have this kind of pincher movement of the Israelis on the one hand saying we will never leave the south until Hezbollah disarms, and you have have the U.S. saying that we won't unfreeze these Iranian assets until they stop funding Hezbollah. Well, they've moved the Hezbollah field back onto the negotiating table, even though it was very clear from the 14-point memorandum of understanding that Hezbollah was meant to be a separate issue that was not included in this, which is why the Iranians were so insistent that a red line be drawn around Lebanon and that it be considered off limits, and that any attacks on Lebanon would be considered violations of the ceasefire with Iran. So the U.S. and Israel are making it very clear that they have no intention of honoring their agreement, or the American agreement. Israel is making it very clear that it has every intention of sabotaging that agreement by saying that no matter what the U.S. says, we will not leave from Lebanon. So we have the sabotage that we always knew the Israelis would produce and put forward, but we don't have the kind of rhetoric that we saw earlier this week from the U.S. trying to kind of demonstrate any distance with the Israelis. So to me, that signals that the U.S. is completely okay with Israel destabilizing this process, and that they're basically going to continue using this 60-day negotiating period to try to extract concessions from Iran on points where they're making.
Absolutely. And Trump has violated the MOU explicitly by threatening to attack Iran. He said, like, what did he say? I'll blow the shit out of Iran. Those were his exact words. Very Lindsey Graham-esque commentary from Donald Trump, but it says in the MOU, do not threaten to attack one another. Threatening, like violent threats, are not allowed. So he's already violated it. It's not very serious from his point of view. And JD Vance is the main salesman, so it doesn't show a lot of confidence by Trump. And Marco Rubio's sitting and waiting in the wings, apparently possibly hoping for it to fail. This is the pet project of Paul Singer and Miriam Adelson. Wyatt, we've got just a few minutes, but I wanted to ask what you saw in the South. Let's play the first minute of your last report, which is called Under Israeli Fire, Lebanese Struggle to Return Home. What do you think of the agreement with Israel? It's ridiculous, says a man who you interviewed in the rubble. No matter what they say, it's not going to happen.
We've just come across Hezbollah's secret weapon, fiber optic cable.
Our fathers were born here. Can't leave this land behind every rock. Under every tree there's soil watered with blood. Wise martyrs.
All of these houses and homes behind me are currently being occupied by Israel.
Today I want to tell you why I decided to come back to my village as a little girl. The village is our village. It's also my homeland. So this is a really compelling report with some of the most vivid scenes we've seen yet from the war in the South at the Grayzone. What did you see there when you were in Tyre and you were in some of the villages around Tyre as thousands and thousands of mostly Shia citizens sought to return home, including to the rubble of their homes and businesses?
Well, I saw a lot of cautious optimism. I saw a lot of people who wanted to believe in this ceasefire agreement, who had faith that it was secured essentially by Iranian negotiators, and who believed that even if there wouldn't be a full ceasefire, that there would be a marked reduce in Israeli attacks. And that was the case for a couple days. And then Israel responded to a devastating attack at the Aliyah Ridge that you were describing earlier, in which 4 Israeli soldiers were neutralized, one of whom was a battalion commander of, I believe, the 52nd Battalion of the 401st Armored Brigade, which again is the the brigade that was responsible for murdering Hind Rajab. So they responded to this with devastating massacres all across the South that killed nearly 100 people in a single day, which was one of the bloodiest days of the war so far. And then the next night, they were again pummeled by the resistance at this same fortification. Something like 15 casualties. One of them was killed, I believe. So they responded again with massacres. Since then, there's been a marked reduction in hostilities. Hezbollah was a re-announced ceasefire, which Hezbollah has largely abided by. The Israelis, on the other hand, are continuing to kind of press their luck. There's been shelling all across the South today. They kidnapped something like 8 farmers from a village in the South, farmers who had the misfortune of crossing paths with occupation soldiers. What else did I see in the South? Well, I saw some evidence of Israeli war crimes. I saw evidence of Hezbollah's attempts to resist that. This was the first time I'd seen in the flesh actual fiber optic cable, something that you can look and hold and touch with your hand and see that, you know, Hezbollah was here firing some kind of drone at Israeli forces somewhere in the vicinity. And I spoke with people who were almost uniformly just fully steadfast in their refusal to abandon the land of their ancestors. You know, you saw the quote from the older gentleman who was in a separate village. A lot of people in the South, they're kind of country people. They don't necessarily want to come to Beirut. They think it's noisy and loud and smelly. They like living out in the woods a little bit more. So if they have the option, they have the means, many of them will stay in smaller cities like Saida, or they'll stay in other villages in the South, but further up north where they're less likely to get killed for, you know, refusing some Israeli order. And so this gentleman was in a separate village. Many of the kids that you see in that video and some of the villagers, they came down to their original homes, the first massacre. They moved back up to villages that are still in the South, but are outside of Israeli soldiers' kind of typical range. So this interview was carried out at a village that was a little further up north, where, you know, people have reestablished themselves in the hopes that they'll get to go back to their actual villages again soon. So people who came down the first couple of days had to pack all their belongings up again and move back up to the north, where they, for who knows how long, until Israel actually shows its intentions of respecting the ceasefire. And I was struck by a lot of the language that people used. That gentleman at the end had a great phrase about under every tree has been kind of watered with the blood of the martyrs. And it reminds me a lot of a famous Thomas Jefferson quote, who said, from time to time, the tree of liberty has to be refreshed with the blood of patriots. And so it's kind of a universal message that, if the man were not speaking Arabic, I think would resonate with a lot of Americans. If he were not opposed to Israeli genocide and ethnic cleansing, I think most people in America would find that to be a very patriotic message. But because he has the misfortune of being born in the periphery of the Israeli entity, that is somehow suddenly makes him some kind of terrorist sympathizer. But it's really a universal desire, and it's one that I found over and over again while I was traveling throughout the South.
What's a very moving report that you produced there. And as I commented on Twitter X, you know, it really just shows some of the most dignified people on the planet who are simply fighting for their own sovereignty and freedom and ability to live in the land of their ancestors, and who just had the misfortune of being born next to a vicious nuclearized apartheid colony. And that is why Hezbollah exists. That's simply why it exists. It doesn't exist to go attack, symbolic targets thousands of miles away. It's basically fighting a war to remove invaders. And it looks like the following today's agreement, unconstitutional agreement between the Lebanese authorities and Israel, that war will continue. Wyatt Reed, thanks so much for your reporting. This is, some of the best reporting we've done at the Grayzone. So I'm really looking forward to your next piece. We got a new short from you about monarchist violence, Pahlavi cultists gone wild at the World Cup. That's up at the Grayzone now. So everyone check that out. I'm going to feature the last 2 minutes of your report. And then we're going to go to Kit Klarenberg on the final collapse of Keir Starmer. Kit's waiting in the green room. Again, Wyatt, thanks a lot. And
Thanks so much, Max.
We'll check in with you soon. So this is the last 2 minutes of Wyatt's report, and I think it's really powerful reporting that everyone needs to see. I'm going to take a short break, so I won't be able to read the subtitles. So, go back to your screen, turn on the sound if you want, but you're going to have to read these subtitles and listen to the voices of these children who are being declared Hezbollah targets by the Israeli military, who are seeking to return to their mostly rural villages in southern Lebanon and are the targets of Israel's latest ethnic cleansing campaign.
زدت على الضيعة وسلمنا على الكاميرا. لا شو عملت؟ رجعت على الضيعة ولعبت وهي باي. نرجع الضيعة لحظة شو نحب نرجع على الضيعة وإن شاء الله توقف الحرب وما يصير حرب ورجع كل شيء وذكرياتنا ورجع كل شيء منيح وإن شاء الله ما يكسروا الضيعة مرة تانية. هيك. سلام، أنا اسمي رقية فرحت من جنوب لبنان، وأنا اليوم حبيت بين فلسطين. اليوم بدي أقولكم ليش صرت أحب أرجع على الضيعة. هن سببين. أول سبب لأنه هي الضيعة ضيعتنا، وكمان هي موتنا وهي ذكرياته. وتاني سبب إنه في حرب. إنه حرب.
شو بدك تساعدك؟ شو تقولي؟
إنه لا في حرب. لا.
زيناتك، معزيات، ألعابك، أخواتك.
لأنه اشتقت لرفيقتي وابن عمي نلعب مع بعض، واشتقت كمان للحيوانات عنا بالبيت. كمان عرفت انه خلق مزايا جديدة صغيرة، وبتمنى انه تخلص الحرب بأقرب وقت.
شو؟
جعبلي تخلص الحرب لأنه في ذكريات بالضيعة. خلاص ما عادش بدي أحكي.
So that's from Wyatt Reed's latest report from southern Lebanon on Lebanese citizens struggling to return home. Kit Klarenberg's on stage. Welcome, Kit. How you doing?
Hey. Very well, thanks, Max. How you doing?
Hanging in there. I guess Keir Starmer falling is some good news. In a otherwise grim landscape. I want to talk to you about that. And I also want to talk to you about one of the most unrecognized, under-acknowledged scandals of Starmer's term, the Ukrainian male model scandal, or what some are calling the rent boys scandal, which the British press, for some reason, refused to touch. It was one of the strangest trials I've seen. This should have been a huge story. But first, I want to just ask you, why do you think Keir Starmer was one of the most unpopular PMs in British history, and why has he fallen? And just what's your take?
Well, he was offering absolutely nothing at the end of the day. I mean, this was an empty vessel in a cheap suit being rewarded for a lifetime of serving the establishment by getting to play prime minister. His entire policy offering was indistinguishable from the Conservatives, apart from some very minor and in many cases not particularly meaningful ways. So I mean, and he's also been embroiled in scandal pretty much from the moment he got elected. There was all sorts of dirt surrounding Starmer, not only through his career as the head of the Crown Prosecution Service, which is almost fetishized, or has been by his media supporters, of which there used to be many, and now there are seemingly very few. But I mean, during that time, as you and I have discussed before, he was centrally involved in the cover-up of Jimmy Savile's historic industrial-scale paedophilia and necrophilia. He was centrally involved in the persecution of Julian Assange, and he also helped. He got MI6 and MI5 off the hook for their extensive involvement in torture post 9/11. Police had tens of thousands of documents naming MI6 officers who were involved in the rendering and torture of often completely innocent people. And Starmer personally, on 3 separate occasions, moved to not prosecute despite overwhelming evidence. So he had a lot of dirt on him, and the way that he became prime minister, the way that he became Labour leader after only 5 years in Parliament, was a campaign group called Labour Together, run by Peter Mandelson. Again, we've discussed this before, Max. It ran an operation to get him elected in the most criminal, corrupt way. It spent almost £1 million which is a lot of money in a UK party leadership campaign. It funneled almost £1 million in dark money to Starmer from wealthy Zionist donors, and quickly, long before Starmer became leader, from about 2016 onwards, Labour Together was centrally involved in trying to destroy Jeremy Corbyn and his support base within the party and within independent media, and pursued all sorts of dirty tricks to achieve that goal. It completely neutralized the Canary, which was for a time an extremely popular left, a completely independent, reader-supported left-wing, very pro-Corbyn website, and there was a targeted multi-front operation to destroy them, which was devastatingly successful.
And they targeted you.
So
personally by name, run by Morgan McSweeney. This was basically like the shadow operation and the slush fund for electing Starmer, and they hired this APCO PR firm which wanted to go after you.
Yeah, well, sorry, I was getting
congratulations
to that. Rambling, Max.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, no, I mean, yeah. So Labour Together, that because of damaging leaks about their very corrupt operations in terms of getting Starmer, into power, they hired a PR firm to spy on and smear journalists, including me specifically. And interestingly, the mainstream media has covered the scandal to an extent, but I haven't been named. So I mean, I'm sure that's just a coincidence. But yeah, I mean, I was very central to the whole thing. They were trying to blame me for these very damaging leaks, suggesting the fact that I'd mentioned Labour Together one time was proof that Labour Together had been hacked by Russians and blah blah, all this nonsense. But I mean, I have pages and pages of heavily redacted documents on this from APCO, which maybe we should do something with one day. But yeah, the whole thing is completely farcical. Starmer became leader through the most corrupt, dirty means possible. He ruled like that. He was surrounded by terrible people, and in a bitter irony, the Labour MP who was part of Labour Together, who personally signed off on the spying operation targeting me, he got thrown under the bus by Starmer and lost his ministerial position. He gave up his parliamentary seat so Andy Burnham could be parachuted in and become the next Prime Minister. So yeah, I mean, so I think the scandals were mounting, and then on June 11th, you have the resignation of John Healey, the Defence Secretary, who's often pictured with Keir, and had been driving this very, very hawkish policy towards Russia, particularly, but also NATO first, supporting NATO expansion and arming Ukraine to the absolute teeth, and supporting them, quote unquote, as long as it takes. In that time, Starmer and Healey were often photographed together wearing military-style uniforms. The propaganda was not subtle at all. Healey resigned because, for all of Starmer's bellicose rhetoric on defence and pledges to increase defence spending, actual increases are absolutely meaningless, and there are being major cuts made to existing military forces before this non-existent extra money even reaches the army. So I mean, clearly Starmer, my gut feeling from when he took office was he was the Prime Minister who was meant to lead Britain into war with Russia. He's failed spectacularly. 50% of young Britons would never fight to defend their country, quote unquote, according to polls. So whoever replaces Starmer will have to just have a go at this again, I suppose. And it looks like people like Paul Mason will be on hand to give them to help.
So earlier this month, 2 men were jailed over arson attacks linked to Keir Starmer. We didn't hear a lot about this. This is from their trial or their sentencing.
And remain secret.
Very dramatic.
I indicate now that I will make available a copy of the sentencing.
These were like Ukrainian male models who, there were 4 of them, but only 2 were sentenced.
On Monday of this week.
And they were apparently paid to attack Keir Starmer's property, but we don't know who paid them, and we weren't allowed to learn that from the trial. Is that correct? What is this scandal that's been referred to as the Ukrainian male models scandal, and how might Keir Starmer have known them? Why would they have known what his property was, which cars he owned, where he lived?
Yeah, well, I mean, in a plot worthy of Zoolander 3, allegedly there are these 2 Ukrainians who were allegedly recruited. I mean, a lot of the facts of the case are not clear at all, but I'm just going off. The official story is that there are these 2 young Ukrainians who were recruited and assisted by a third who was subsequently acquitted to perpetrate arson against a car owned several years ago by Keir Starmer, the properties he used to manage in London, which he's no longer connected to, and a home he was living in again in London before he became Prime Minister and moved into 10 Downing Street. Now, yeah, I mean, it gets very, very murky from here. But I mean, as you rightly asked, how on earth could these 3 Ukrainians know the information that's clearly not available to average citizens? All 3 of them being young Ukrainian men who are avoiding the draft as strenuously as possible back home. Yeah, I mean, they are listed on male model websites, and it came out during the trial that they had Grindr accounts that were mysteriously deleted after they were arrested. But the point is that they were allegedly recruited by this Russian, but also Ukrainian-speaking Telegram user called L or EL Money. Now, the trial was extremely weird, not least because the media wasn't going anywhere near it. Now, there is an independent journalist called Crispin Flintoff who went every single day of the 21-day trial, just out of curiosity. He's written a very interesting account for his Substack of going in every day and what he saw and evidence that he heard. And he delves into how what was heard in court either didn't emerge in the media or was grossly distorted for political reasons. But we'll get into that in due course. Now, from the outset of the trial, after prosecutors announced that this L Money character or characters had recruited the Ukrainians and spoke Russian, there was a kind of blitz in the media about the trial, and then it was left alone for its duration. Flintoff reveals that there was a contempt of court, very stringent contempt of court restrictions, which are a major thing in the UK, as we've written about in respect of Palestine Action. At one point, Crispin himself thought that he was going to go to prison because of his daily updates on the progress of the trial on YouTube. But the point is the judge explicitly stated that jurors were not to consider who El Money was. Prosecutors repeatedly made this point throughout the trial. So what evidence was considered by the jury and to the extent it emerged publicly, centered solely on the question of whether the three accused had committed arson. As I say, one was acquitted, two were jailed for very lengthy sentences for arson offences. But what's really strange about this is, again, as we've written about the Grayzone, Britain has a very draconian bit of legislation called the National Security Act, which entered into force in December 2023. And it grants British authorities sweeping powers to tackle precisely these sort of crimes, where people have allegedly been recruited by quote unquote hostile foreign powers via Telegram or other forms of social media. And there's been a lot of talk in the mainstream media about how evil Iran and Russia and China are using messaging apps, etc., to try and recruit agents to carry out sabotage. Some people have been jailed in the UK under this act for committing arson. The Ukrainians, even though they were held in Belmarsh, that's where Julian Assange ended up, it's Britain's Guantanamo, it's high security prison. They weren't charged with national security offences at all, and the very obvious national security implications of the sitting prime minister being targeted in a very direct, personal, and potentially lethal way, it didn't really register in the media at all, which was very strange.
That is the strangest thing. Like Golders Green, the stabbing, the threat level of the UK was raised by Starmer to severe, but the threat level was never raised when the prime minister's property, home, cars were targeted with arson. What's up with that?
Yeah, precisely. It's just it's very. I mean, even little small incidents where politicians in the UK get green slime thrown at them, usually elicits mainstream debate about the security of elected lawmakers and reviews of their security arrangements. Not so in this case, bizarrely. But things get weirder and weirder because there were actually very clear indications that there was a potential sexual component here, one way or another. These people had openly accessible profiles on modeling websites, etc. There were other handsome young men, so a number of people, ranging from George Galloway to Tommy Robinson, did speculate whether they were rent boys who Starmer had failed to pay off. That wasn't explored at the trial at all, and what was heard was extremely limited. Now, within hours of the verdict's landing, I believe that was on June 15th, the BBC published a almost 4,000 word long read on the trial, and also a dedicated and very slick panorama documentary with talking heads like Christo Grozev from Bellingcat, and very, very dubious figure who left Bellingcat in very strange circumstances. But all saying, well, this is textbook Russian tradecraft, etc. And not only that, the BBC claimed, based on material it alone seemingly had access to, that they had identified precisely who El Money was, and it was apparently this 23-year-old, but apparently very well connected information warfare specialist within the Russian intelligence services, which is this did not come out at trial at all. As I say, judges and prosecutors were very keen to remind jurors that they were not to consider this in any way, moreover, the BBC acknowledged how quote unquote strange the trial was, that the author of the drama, i.e. El Money, identity was never revealed and also deliberately avoided, quote unquote. So, I mean, why the BBC is solving this case on behalf of British police and courts, I don't know. The BBC did quote a senior counter-terror officer saying that there's no evidence whatsoever that El Money was working for any state or was Russian. A detail which has not really been mentioned in the mainstream media, although has been acknowledged, was that the user spoke Ukrainian, quote unquote, perfectly. And very few Russians speak Ukrainian, whereas most Ukrainians, even if they might not admit it, do speak Russian. So there's all sorts of oddity around this. One of the defendants, Lavronovich, who's I think he's got the best part of 10 years in jail for his role in this, has said during the trial that he thought that El Money was several people, that he thought he was talking to a woman at one stage, and there might have been 2 or 3 men involved. So the attribution of this attack to Russia is very, very dubious. But after the BBC published these clearly pre-rehearsed and long in the making investigations into how this was absolutely Russia, the FT followed suit. The Insider, linked to Bellingcat, as I mentioned.
Paul Mason had this tweet. This is Paul Mason. The UK is under hybrid attack, and every Brit who spread Russian disinformation narrative about Keir Starmer is a traitor. Hang your heads, idiots.
Yeah. Well, that's Paul Mason all over. But this is another really bizarre thing about the post-trial media blitz, is that there was all of this shrieking condemnation from politicians, public figures like Peter Tatchell, this longtime gay rights campaigner who was all in on the Syrian dirty war, and politicians from every party, and they're all trying to gin up public sympathy for Starmer, saying this was a disgusting attack on a man and his family. This shows that why we need to defeat Putin in Ukraine, and the person we're meant to feel really sorry for has just quit. It's very bizarre. It's very bizarre, and there are all sorts of questions about this that haven't been resolved. As I say, I would urge people to read Crispin Flintoff's account because it's very, very, very interesting.
What are the most serious lingering questions in your view?
Well, quite obviously, El Money was central to this, but we don't know who they are. The court didn't look into it. The police say they've got no evidence that this person works for any state, and then yet the media has convicted Russia. That's a very obvious question. How did they, as you say, Max, know details about Starmer's properties that wouldn't be open to the general public? Why were they held in Belmarsh if they're not being charged on national security offences? Why weren't they charged on national security offences? And again, what was with the almost total media blackout beyond announcing that people had been arrested for this a year ago. And I might add that initially prosecutors explicitly were quoted in the media and stated in court that they didn't have any evidence indicating why the defendants might have done this. But they seem to have settled on Russia as a comfortable option much further down the line. And yes, clearly there has been some degree of coordination with the security services. There is a strange reference in the BBC's long read to how sources have told the BBC that authorities in the UK and Ukraine have concluded Russia was responsible. It's a bit strange for Ukraine to be investigating a British criminal case. And you might reasonably ask, why on earth that would be, and whether they are working directly with British intelligence and law enforcement on this. But then you also factor in the fact that Ukraine's SBU, which is their primary internal security and spying agency, which is very heavily infiltrated by the CIA and MI6 and has been since Maidan. They, for many years, have been recruiting Russian citizens to commit petty vandalism and to ruin ballot boxes, to start fires on government buildings for many years. They got it down to a fine art. Sometimes they offer financial incentives, other times they blackmail people or scam them into doing these things. But the mainstream media, of course, never referenced that or connected these very, very obvious dots as to who might have an interest in burning down Starmer's home. But the entire thing is just very, very, very bizarre. And as I mentioned, Starmer was his purpose was to try and get the UK on the warpath. The British government is formally committed to preparing the population for war. People don't want it. Starmer and everyone around him were very bad salespeople for anything, least of all, nuclear holocaust. And so, I mean, he had to go. And then now it's Burnham's chance to spend, at this rate, maybe a few weeks trying to achieve what Starmer couldn't, and then getting shunted away. This is the state of Britain today.
Well, yeah, I guess in closing, we're going to move on in a few minutes. But, in closing, Andy Burnham, to me, it seemed like this was the guy the establishment, the labor establishment or the labor right wing wanted, but they wound up having to overcome Corbynism first. And then Starmer sort of stepped into the breach as the guy who was going to neutralize the Corbynites and ultimately commit suicide on behalf of labor. But now they're back to Burnham. I mean, is there any real material political difference between him and Keir Starmer? Is he just a sort of friendlier face for the same, old wine in a new bottle?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's interesting what you say, because I mean, you got to remember that in 2015, Burnham was the front runner in that year's Labour leadership contest, and of course, it was won by Jeremy Corbyn. I remember watching because I was all in on Corbyn. It must be admitted at the time, and I remember watching very closely their performances in debates. And Burnham just had this incredible habit of just never being able to answer a question and spending 5 minutes not answering basic questions, whereas Corbyn would offer very punchy, tight answers to the extent that even very conservative pundits were saying Corbyn is clearly the credible candidate here, and Burnham isn't. So there's probably a huge degree of bitterness that it's taken so long for his anointment as Labour leader. But yeah, I mean, Starmer was sold as this very as a sage statesman, a family man who can hold a meeting and give a speech. Well, he can't even do these basic things. There was an attempt to turn how boring, kind of grindingly tedious he is, and his terrible asthmatic insect voice into somehow positive qualities. There were, I mean, it sounds like I'm making it up, but I'm not. There were op-eds published in supposedly serious newspapers about Starmer's boring sex appeal. I'm not kidding. But that didn't really work, because he's just this completely empty vessel and very annoying and charmless, and was also doing absolutely horrendous things. I mean, he personally flew to the Akatori base in Cyprus, where Britain for decades has run secret military and intelligence units, and this is the primary base of operations whereby Britain is centrally involved in the Gaza genocide. There are a lot of spy flights that hover over Gaza menacingly, sent from there, that pass information to Tel Aviv. There are the British Special Forces soldiers and their equipment are sent back and forth, so Britain can do its part. Just slaughtering innocent Palestinians, particularly women and children, of course. Starmer visited them, I believe it was the end of 2024, and specifically said, we're so grateful for what you're doing. Of course, I can't talk about what you're doing, but keep it up. So, I mean, here he's centrally himself implicated in a 21st century Holocaust, but of course, that he's not going to face any consequences for that, and it's not going to be mentioned in his many fawning mainstream obituaries. That the phrase "decent man" keeps cropping up and up and up, and it is hardly a decent man who, without shame, it seems, is involved in covering up Jimmy Savile's sex crimes. But this is what passes for decency in British politics these days.
Yeah, I saw some. Maybe it was The Guardian. I can't remember. It was sort of center-left publication on Starmer, what he accomplished. He recognized a Palestinian state and tried to shore up Britain's social democracy. It was a complete whitewash.
Did Paul Mason write it?
It wasn't Mason, but it was just a headline that was a complete whitewash. But no one's being fooled in the UK. What's left of the British left has no reason to be a part of Labour any longer. And Britain seems to be heading into like reform territory. They're just heading to the far shores of the right after Labour neutralized the left. And just last question is kind of,
yeah, go ahead.
Does this kind of portend a massive shift to the right, to Farage?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think that's always been the trajectory, and there were sharp-eyed people like Matt Kennard, who, I mean, as early as 2020 was writing excellent pieces for the Grayzone on the very troubling in deep state connections of Keir Starmer and his membership of the very spooky and ominous Trilateral Commission. So, I mean, he pointed out, Kennard did, years ago, that Starmer would at most be a one-term prime minister who laid the foundations for Nigel Farage. Of course, Farage and people like Musk, who are frequently built up as these, kind of almost cartoon villains in the British media, they are extremely useful to the British establishment in every way, much like much like Trump is in the US. For all of the condemnations and the and the scaremongering, these people are creatures of the establishment. I mean, we recently saw in occupied Ireland, as I think we might have something forthcoming on. There was fake race riots. Like there was a completely stage managed and choreographed attacks on the homes of migrants and migrant-owned businesses in occupied Ireland, and it was sold in the mainstream media as a completely spontaneous burst of dangerous far right fervor. In reality, all of the people on at this riot, they were bussed in. They were like young people who were apolitical and had jobs to do, and had been brought there by Protestant paramilitary groups that in many cases receive direct and indirect funding from the British state to this day. But a interesting feature of this is none other than the Centre for Countering Digital Hate, which was founded by none other than Labour Together, and was involved in neutralising the Canary, and was heavily involved in kind of censorship around COVID, quote unquote, disinformation. They published a report on how Musk had, deliberately stoked the fires of, racist hatred and was a central figure within within this upheaval. It's a lie, but I mean, whenever there's a riot in the UK, as we've just reported, often it's the state themselves doing it. But I mean, at the very least, even if there is absolutely, like they're quote unquote stirring this up. But in by the same token, all of this stuff, even if it's not fully orchestrated by the security and intelligence services, it grants the state an extraordinary license to pursue censorship and all sorts of savage crackdowns on free speech. Recently, a variety of bans have come in on restrictions on VPN use, bans on social media usage by under 16s, which is a smokescreen for forcing people to verify their ages using their government provided IDs on social media, which kills anonymity dead. And makes it very easy to link people to particular social media accounts. And this is all, this always is implemented in the wake of major riots or, supposed organic terror plots. In 2024, there was race rioting in which Tommy Robinson, another establishment creature tied to Israel, was central. Over a series of killings in a city in England called Southport. That was cited as a justification for banning VPNs and online privacy. And restricting online privacy. So Starmer himself racked up it stunned even me. I was expecting him to be very authoritarian and outright totalitarian. He passed all sorts of absolutely extraordinary bits of legislation, restricting basic protest rights, criminalize it. Of course, we've had the Supreme Court just sign off on the government's prescription of Palestine Action as a terrorist group, around the time that their actionists are being jailed for very, very, very long terms as terrorists, despite not being tried on those charges. So, I mean, this is the Britain Starmer entered and the Britain Starmer leaves, and I don't think it will be changing very much very soon.
No, the trajectory will remain the same, which is toward repression and a sense of occupation for many citizens, and the relationship with Palantir, which Starmer consolidated, will probably deepen. But Kit, I wanted to give you the chance for this post-Starmer victory lap, and excellent presentation as always. And we're definitely looking forward to your report on what just took place in Northern Ireland. You do have an explosive report that's already on the Grayzone right now on, it's a sort of a historical report relying on leaks from some MI6 veterans on how they instigated riots during the Troubles in Northern Ireland, which sort of previews your next more contemporary report that we're looking forward to. So thanks a lot for joining us today.
My pleasure. Thanks, Max. God bless you.
Good seeing you. All right, we got Aaron Mate in the building, and we'll bring him onto stage. If you give me a thumbs up when you're ready. You look ready. All right. What's up, Aaron?
How's it going, Max? Good to see you.
Good. Yeah, so you're in the Commie Corridor, as people are calling it now, in Brooklyn, or yeah, it's become like the real center of anti-Zionist terrorism these days. No one would have expected that a few years ago.
Yeah, we're going to get into it. I'd be cautious personally, but extrapolating too much from votes in the Commie Corridor. I don't think where I am in Brooklyn represents the majority of the country. Although it does on the issue of Israel, I think, at least according to Democratic polls, on that issue, I think actually the Commie Corridor speaks for the country. So, and that explains why there is a freak out going on now inside the Democratic Party establishment. But, I want to be cautious, especially after 2020, when Bernie, contrary to many people's expectations, including myself, he got creamed by Joe Biden. That we not extrapolate too much, or we be cautious about extrapolating too much from the results in a leftist enclave like New York City. But at the same time, it's really significant. But before we get into it, I just think we should update people if you're watching live.
Yeah.
What's happening? If you're feeling optimistic about the prospects of peace in the aftermath of this memorandum of understanding between the Trump administration and Iran, it's not a good afternoon. So you had, and you talked about this earlier, the signing of this agreement between the Lebanese government and Israel in Washington. And Netanyahu immediately announced that the Israeli army is not leaving southern Lebanon. And if that's the case, that's a new threat to a broader peace deal between Iran and the U.S., because Iran has made an Israeli withdrawal from Lebanon a red line. So there's that. And then on top of that, shortly afterwards, the U.S. bombed Iran, claiming that it's retaliation for what they allege was an Iranian strike on a vessel passing in the Strait of Hormuz on Thursday. And so the U.S. now, CENTCOM now says they've hit missile and drone sites inside of Iran. So at a time when there's supposed to be negotiations towards a final peace deal, you have the Trump administration bombing Iran, and they claim it's about Iran striking a ship in the Strait of Hormuz. And I don't even know if that's true, if it was Iran that did do that, although I wouldn't be surprised if it was, given that they're, taking control of the ships passing there, and they're encouraging people to use authorized routes. But Lebanon is really hanging over, is hanging over all of this, because one of the reasons Iran is so intent on exerting control over the Strait of Hormuz is to use its leverage to ensure an Israeli withdrawal from Lebanon, which took a step backwards today with the signing of this agreement between the Lebanese government and Israel, and Netanyahu saying that he's not going to withdraw.
So the U.S. just bombed Iran.
Yeah.
Hours ago. Looks like they've struck drone sites in the south because Iran has been keeping the Strait of Hormuz closed because Israel will not allow Lebanon to be at peace and continues to massacre people in South Lebanon and not allow them to return home. What you saw in Wyatt's piece that we excerpted earlier, that's why the Strait of Hormuz has been closed and the U.S. is now bombing. It's not going to work. It's not going to open up the Strait of Hormuz. But we can see the MOU beginning to unravel under Israeli pressure. It didn't take a whole lot, did it? I mean, they have so much leverage over Trump, and he's not willing to stand up to them in the way that is necessary.
Yeah, and Trump let J.D. Vance be performative, say some harsh words to the government. But so far, it's just been words. There was an order handed down among to the Israeli military to hold back in southern Lebanon. And from what I've heard from people there, things have calmed down a little more since the MOU, but still, it's mostly just words so far from the Trump administration. It's J.D. Vance getting to go around, make the rounds, go on podcasts, go before the media, wag his finger at the Israeli government. But so far, not enough to derail a peace agreement, as we're seeing today with the U.S. now bombing Iran.
No, and Marco Rubio's nowhere to be seen, but you can imagine he's hoping this doesn't work for a lot of reasons.
I mean, he was there today at the signing ceremony. I mean, this was his baby today, this deal between the very pliant Lebanese government and the Israeli government. He was right there behind them. He loves this, and he's hoping to use this agreement to basically sideline Iran's role. And the Lebanese government's going along with it because one of the reasons they're in these talks is to sideline Iran for being able to force an Israeli withdrawal.
Yep.
It's really striking.
Yep. It's basically giving Israel the green light to remain in the South, as Wyatt said. And here's Marco Rubio at the center, the creation of the Israel lobby of Paul Singer and Miriam Adelson and Sheldon Adelson's money, hailing this deal. And this is the real concrete deal that's aimed straight at the MOU that J.D. Vance has been selling. And Trump's in the middle of it. And, what is Trump doing? He's barking threats at Iran. I mean, and is Trump even mentally coherent? Not really. He's more focused on arresting people near the reflecting pool who he blames for a failed renovation, which is sort of a perfect symbol for where he's taken MAGA. So I don't know. Will this, the Israelis have been in a full meltdown since Trump signed the MOU. And it's kind of like a perfect analog for what's been taking place in New York with the meltdown of Zionists focused on a handful of DSA-backed candidates winning. Here's the former spokesman, the former Persian spokesman for the IDF, the Israeli army, declaring maybe USA needs another Pearl Harbor or 9/11 to remember who is the enemy and who is the friend. Quote tweeting Jason Brodsky, Israel lobbyist, Israeli cutout from the campaign against a nuclear Iran, who's declaring that the U.S. will regret to acquiescing to Iranian demands to include Lebanon in this MOU. This linkage is one of the biggest mistakes.
Which is such a funny talking point, because these are the same people who supported this war on Iran based on the premise that Iran has to accept the linkage between its sovereignty and it giving up support for its allies like Lebanon. So in waging a regime change war in Iran, you're allowed to make the linkage of saying, hey, we're going to destroy your country unless you stop supporting groups like Hezbollah.
Yeah.
But when the regime change war loses and Iran says, hey, as part of a peace agreement, you have to stop enabling the Israeli attack on southern Lebanon, where Hezbollah is. In fact, all of Lebanon, where Hezbollah is. All of a sudden, they reject linkage. So linkage is fine for regime change, but when regime change fails and Iran has to, and is now in position to impose its terms to have peace, all of a sudden, linkage is rejected.
Yeah, which just confirms the analysis of Iran's leadership after the 12-day war. A speech just leaked in Iran of Ali Larijani, the late former parliamentary speaker who was assassinated by Israel in the last assault on Iran. in which he basically made the case that international institutions are controlled by the U.S. and Israel. No one at the Security Council stood up against Iran being assaulted without provocation. The IAEA did not stand up, and Rafael Grossi said nothing about Iran's nuclear sites being attacked. And so this only left hard power as a deterrent, and that Iran had to have prepared itself for another major war in order to be able to defend its very sovereignty. And so that's where we are once again now, with the U.S. being the arbiter of an MOU involving Israel in Lebanon. Of course, the U.S. isn't going to enforce the terms there. Of course. And none of the international institutions where the U.S. exerts control will be capable of doing so either. So it only looks like, as I've seen some Israeli commentators predict, that the U.S. just needed to sequence out the next phase with a 60-day pause, and then they'll just return to business as usual, which is regime change. And the latest this agreement between Lebanon and Israel signals that that's on the way. But, there's still been this really unbelievable meltdown just to have this pause in the war. Mark Levin is over in Israel. He's basically been taken there in order to work on Trump and to undermine the MOU. He's on like kind of a propaganda junket by a foreign country to undermine the initiative of a U.S. president, this Fox News host who's sort of one of Netanyahu's main voices in the U.S. And he's saying, everywhere I'm going in Israel, the public here is very concerned and baffled by what's transpiring. Lots of people coming up to me about it, but I've been receiving the same reaction in our country. And he's quote tweeting Hugh Hewitt, who's actually a host on Salem Media, which is run by an Israeli foreign agent. But, everyone in Israel is so up in arms because peace could break out. They're afraid that there won't be a war, says Mark Levin. They're terrified.
And why should anybody in his country care about what Israelis are telling them? Like,
yeah,
what does that matter to the average American? What an Israeli is concerned about? It's this weird identification with a foreign apartheid state that most Americans don't share, and in fact explicitly reject if you look at polls.
Yeah, it would be like, everyone's coming up to me in, Bosnia to comment on this international initiative of the U.S. I mean, it's like, that's a small, tiny country. Why would anyone care? But Israel's different. It's not a state. It's something else. And Mark Levin is representing it and representing the dominant power mafia in that entity. Channel 14 in Israel, which is the pro-Netanyahu propaganda channel, featured the mentalist Uri Geller, who claims an ability to bend spoons. Have you ever come across him before? Uri Geller, or have you ever seen anyone bend a spoon with their mind?
I only know him as being like a one-time confidant of Michael Jackson back when Shmuley Botiak was also, getting in there. That's what I remember Uri Geller from.
Yeah. They all kind of wind up in the same place.
Yeah.
We claimed that he could bend spoons. He apparently couldn't bend Khorramshahr missiles off their course. And so Israel kind of lost this joint assault on Iran with the U.S. And so now Uri Geller is on Channel 14 declaring that advanced Iranian technology, which affects human brain function, may have been used against the president to make him sign the MOU. That's kind of like the level of analysis that you're getting in the pro-Netanyahu media space in Israel about Iran. As if Trump were to enforce an Israeli pullback from Lebanon, you could imagine, the concept of a new Pearl Harbor or 9/11 moving more towards a planning stage. I mean, just if you consider the levels of hysteria in Israel over the possibility of the U.S. having normal relations with Iran, it would just defeat the entire life purpose of Netanyahu and the military intelligence establishment of Israel. It's unacceptable.
Well,
yeah. Here's Marco Rubio, who is signaling where he wants to take things. J.D. Vance is giving interviews on Air Force Two to Sohrab Ahmari, the reformed former neocon who's now against regime change war, from Unheard. And this is what Marco Rubio is saying. It's sort of like the classic neocon rhetoric.
You still believe that language applies?
Yeah.
You used to call them religious theocratic lunatics. You still believe that language applies to the leadership today?
Well, look, it's not that I believe it, it's the fact of the matter. I mean, the Iranian system is led by clerics, radical clerics. That's what it's always been led by, and that's what it continues to be led by. That said, we also have to manage the geopolitics of the situation. And then there's if they've changed their mindset, or if they've changed their approach to their relations with the United States and their neighbors, then we're going to give this thing a chance to work. Maybe this changed. I'm not saying it has. I'm saying the president wants to explore whether that's the case. And if it has, we're going to find out. But we're not going to find out because of what they say. We're going to find out because of what they do.
So they're lunatics led by clerics. He's in Bahrain, by the way, where the Fifth Fleet Navy base of the United States had been basically wrecked in the war that Rubio supported. The damage is far worse than was officially acknowledged. And they're ruled by the hated Al Khalifa family, a monarchy. I don't know. I guess that's better than being a republic, which is guided by clerics, who he calls lunatics. But
they failed to achieve regime change in Iran. So now they're thinking is, all right, we failed there, but then we can't have another defeat in Lebanon. Like, we can't continue to tolerate the existence of Hezbollah. So they're going to go all in on the strategy of trying, I don't know how, supporting Israel as it attacks Lebanon, but Israel's shown that it can't fight Hezbollah on the ground. They take heavy casualties every time. Trump has recently mused about using Syria to attack Hezbollah. Syria's in no position to do that. They're recovering from a decade-long dirty war that put an al-Qaeda offshoot in power. And even though the Syrian government might want to settle an old score with Hezbollah, because Hezbollah intervened against the al-Qaeda dominated insurgency, they can't. The Syrian government is in no position to. And that's partly because after regime change worked in Syria, Israel, because it wants to keep all of its neighbors weak, destroyed much of the Syrian military. So Israel didn't do that goal any favor by wiping out the force that Trump now wants to use as a proxy against Hezbollah. So, but because they just can't accept Hezbollah's presence inside Lebanon, Mike Waltz recently called Hezbollah a cancer. And you're talking about I don't know, a strong segment of the population. I don't know what percentage supports Hezbollah, but it's a very strong number. You're basically talking about not accepting a major element of a country's society. And so it's just a recipe of perpetual conflict. And Iran has shown, especially because they defeated this regime change war, they're not going to sell out Hezbollah, especially because Hezbollah is integral to Iran's self-defense because Iran doesn't have nukes. So they're going to take out, I think, their frustrations in failing to overthrow Iran on Lebanon, and that's going to prevent any chance of a peace deal between the U.S. and Iran. And I don't think, I've never thought Trump was going to go back to a regime change war against Tehran, but now I think it will shift to Lebanon, and that could then fuel continued sporadic clashes as we're seeing today with the U.S. bombing Iran.
Yep. So it's sort of a frozen conflict, which is what I chose as the theme or title of this live stream. And the conflict or the conflict will grow in this country between larger and larger segments of the U.S. population and their political leadership, who are Zionist stalwarts. So I do think what we saw in New York, while it's not necessarily a national trend, is a reflection of, or a preview of what's to come, because you have younger, more highly educated, politically educated voters. Many of them, the kind of people who would, show up at Grayzone Day in Rutherford, New Jersey. Others, many others who joined the DSA and so forth in order to kind of organize and stage a semi-hostile takeover of the Democratic Party, scoring victories in which Israel is emerged as a major issue. We've never seen this before including in a place like New York. And it needs to be said that the candidates that Mamdani and the DSA-backed, they didn't just rely entirely on, white gentrifiers and grad students. They were, competing in heavily Black and Latino districts, which are gentrifying. But most of them, these candidates won a majority of Black voters and came close to winning a majority of Latino voters in the Bronx to defeat the chair of the House Democratic Hispanic Caucus. So there was like a larger discrediting of the Democratic Party and the kind of brown and Black puppets that they put up for office. Hakeem Jeffries is definitely imperiled here. These candidates who are backed by AIPAC. And we saw Dan Goldman go down by 30 points to Brad Lander. Dan Goldman being the heir to the Levi Strauss fortune, who is so progressive. He was as progressive as AOC, except for Palestine, where he was a genocidal fascist. And that's what he was punished for by Brad Lander, who shifted from liberal Zionist to kind of non-Zionist or even quasi-anti-Zionist in order to cater to the sensibilities, the emerging sensibilities of the younger base of the Democratic Party in a kind of urban metropole like New York. So this is kind of terrifying for AIPAC. It should be, but it's not terrifying for Jews. It shouldn't. And that's the way it's been framed in this Zionist freakout we'll address. But Aaron, what's your take on what just took place in your city?
Well, it's really exciting. And, Brad Lander, in fairness, he calls himself a progressive Zionist. But at the same time, what sets him apart is that he does support blocking weapons to Israel, unlike someone like Dan Goldman. And
unlike J Street.
And unlike J Street as well. And it is significant. A few years ago, the idea that Dan Goldman, who was like an MSNBC superstar, remember, he came into public attention because he was the Democrats' lawyer in the first impeachment of Donald Trump when they targeted him for freezing weapons to Ukraine while pressuring its government to help him out with his political vendettas. So Dan Goldman was like an MSNBC superstar because he, led that first impeachment drive, and he campaigned on that, and no one cared because that era is over. Because since then, people have seen a live stream genocide that Dan Goldman supported, and he got crushed for that, including, among Jewish voters. So, and then the other two candidates who won, Claire Valdez and her last name is Chevalier.
Oh yeah, Daria Liza Avila Chevalier.
Yeah. They're a lot more radical. I mean, and by the way, on the issue of Ukraine, they both essentially criticized the U.S. proxy war strategy and have called for diplomacy. And if they can hold that position for longer than 24 hours after being sworn in, then they'll surpass the congressional progressives who withdrew their pro-diplomacy letter just after a little bit of a freak out from neocons back in 2022. So, I mean, and especially Chevalier has been really attacked now because she holds some really, I think you can call what's considered radical views. She's unapologetically anti-imperialist, and she'll face a lot of pressure. I think she's going to be like the new Ilhan Omar in terms of like the subject of a lot of bigotry from the MAGA Fox News crowd. So their victory, it's really exciting. And I also think it does reflect the huge popularity of Zohran Mamdani. I mean, he got a lot of people out to vote. And if he's not the mayor, I don't think these victories happen. I think that's pretty clear. And does that have national implications? I think there's a limit on that. But certainly the fact that all these candidates were against AIPAC, I do think that moved the needle, and they got people really excited, and they're all very, I think, articulate speakers, and they'll be good with the message of, like investing in our babies at home, not bombs abroad. I mean, it's a catchy message, and it appeals to a lot of people, especially after what they've seen unfold in Gaza and the rest of the Middle East region over these last several years. So it's an exciting time.
The Republicans are going to go nuts with this, or they already are, to try to paint these as the faces of the Democratic Party. I don't know if that's going to work. And this is the rhetoric we're starting to hear. This is Bruce Blakeman, who's a Republican gubernatorial candidate who will probably lose in New York on Brad Lander, who is Jewish.
And Brad Lander, he's a disgrace. He's anti-American. He's anti-Semitic. Even though he's Jewish, this guy would be a camp guard in a concentration camp if he could. He's a disaster. He's terrible.
Very articulate. He's on Newsmax, which is essentially a foreign agent for Israel, which is funded by the Israeli Foreign Ministry. And, you know, that new Zionist rule, Mike Huckabee is a better Jew than Brad Lander because he loyally serves the foreign apartheid state of quote unquote Israel. That's the logic being put forward. These are the unhinged attacks we're seeing and hearing. Sean Hannity, who is, you know, one of the obviously key Trump propagandists who you would think would hate Dan Goldman because Dan Goldman was the prosecutor of Trump on on Russiagate. I mean,
on Trump's first impeachment.
Trump's first impeachment around Ukraine and refusing to provide offensive weapons and so on. So Dan Goldman was one of the, you know, targets of Sean Hannity, and Sean Hannity's on the verge of tears over Dan Goldman losing.
All right, this is a Fox News alert. Incumbent Congressman Dan Goldman, who was just banned from a New York City coffee shop because of his support for Israel, is now lost his primary to a radical socialist backed by Mamdani. It appears that, you know, a pretty scary transformation is now fully underway in the Democratic Party, especially in a blue state like New York.
So if you missed that, he said this is a scary transformation in the Democratic Party. So yes, Sean Hannity, one of Trump's biggest cheerleaders on Fox News, he's scared that the guy who prosecuted Trump in the first impeachment has lost. I mean, that does speak to how lame the Resistance 1.0 was. The fact that Sean Hannity is upset that like one of the like chief leaders of the resistance has lost because it underscores that people like Dan Goldman weren't actually a threat to Trump because they channeled the Democratic Party into things like standing up to him because he froze weapons to Ukraine. And on top of that being like a neocon project, it also was like voters didn't care. In fact, Trump ended that first impeachment with the highest ratings of his presidency. But they are scared of people like Zohran Mamdani because Zohran Mamdani is talking about meeting workers' actual needs, putting working people first, making New York City affordable, not just the domain of rich people, and investing in communities rather than investing in destroying communities in Palestine. So that's why Sean Hannity is getting choked up and actually being scared by this version of the Democratic Party.
Yeah, Sean Hannity. I haven't watched him in a long time. He looks like the old Sean Hannity, but he's on the other side of a plate glass window, and his face is pressed up against the plate glass. It's like, how long is Sean Hannity just going to hold that chair? This is, one of the token Republican Trump supporter on CNN, Scott Jennings, who also happens to be on Salem Media, which is, again, run by and distributed by an Israeli foreign agent, a registered foreign agent for Israel. Jennings has been on the propaganda junkets to Israel along with his counterpart at CNN, Van Jones, and here he is on what's happening right now in New York City.
I'm surprised you sort of glossed over the main issue in this race, which is Israel. I mean, Dan Goldman is a congressman, and he's Jewish, and he went into a coffee shop this weekend in Brooklyn, and they said, "You're not welcome here anymore." Brad Lander is out speaking in mosques, telling those people that he'd like to go align himself with Ilhan Omar and the rest of the squad. Dan Goldman's only sin, I guess, is that he thinks Israel has a right to exist. And for that, that has been the principal issue in this. And you've got the mayor of New York City, Mamdani, out saying about AIPAC and Jewish Americans who have participated in our politics that they are, quote, monsters. What is happening right now in New York City, the Democrat socialist takeover of the Democratic Party, should frighten not just Jewish Americans, but all Americans everywhere, because this is the direction the Democrats are headed nationally. Look what's happening in Michigan, and it is frightening. Throwing Democrat Jewish congressmen out of coffee shops in Brooklyn, New York, it's not 1930s Germany. This is the United States of America. I'm surprised you sort of...
It's not.
I mean, notice how he referred to the people that Dan Goldman's speaking to in mosques. He's because those people, right? He's talking about Muslims, right? So you can see the bigotry right there. He's like contemptuous of of Brad Lander. Sorry, Brad Lander, who defeated Dan Goldman for speaking to those people, quote unquote, in a mosque. And then he says that Zohran Mamdani called Jewish voters monsters. No, he was referring to AIPAC specifically and other dark money groups that interfere in U.S. politics and, you know, spend tens of millions of dollars to defeat people who oppose genocide, as they did to members of both parties, Thomas Massey on the Republican side, as well as Cory Bush and Jamal Bowman on the Democratic side. It's unbelievable how disingenuous he can be in just a very quick soundbite, but falsehoods and just outright bigotry in that.
They focus group these are GOP talking points. They're trying to paint the Democrats as anti-Semitic. They've always been trying to do this. And it's not necessarily because they want to win the Jewish vote. The Republicans never do, but they're catering to a donor class, which is coming over to their side increasingly. And they are presenting a warped vision of the reality that people experience in New York. Like, what if Dan Goldman had not been Jewish, but had been denied coffee over his support for the Gaza genocide? They would have denied coffee to anyone who supported the genocide. That's a real issue in large parts of New York City, where people just watched the Holocaust of our time unfold in real time, and they're furious about it. And the Trump administration just immediately adopted Dan Goldman. What's her name? Harmeet Dillon, who is the number 3 official at the DOJ in charge of the quote unquote civil rights division, or basically gutting civil rights, who happens to be the law firm representing Show Faith by Works, which is another registered foreign agent for the state of Israel. Like in every case here, there is a connection directly to the Israeli Foreign Ministry. She launched an investigation against that coffee shop on behalf of Dan Goldman, as though he were a hate crime victim.
Yeah, and by the way, he wasn't even denied service. He bought coffee in the coffee shop, and then the coffee shop put out a post later on saying, "Hey, Dan Goldman, your money's no good here, and we're giving you a refund because we don't want money that's blood-soaked, that supports genocide." So he wasn't even denied service, and it's pretty brilliant. I mean, look, there's so much of Brad Lander's position on Israel you can criticize. I mean, again, he calls himself a progressive Zionist, which is a contradiction in itself, but it's pretty brilliant to run a Jewish guy against Dan Goldman, because you can see this desperate attempt to use Dan Goldman being Jewish as the reason why he lost. And, but, you know, he was defeated by another Jewish guy and defeated with the votes of a lot of Jewish voters in Park Slope, you know, and other heavily Jewish areas. So strategically, it was pretty smart of Zohran Mamdani to get behind this. And you know, I haven't seen Dan Goldman come out and forcefully reject this, like, you know, all these Republicans using his case to attack the Democrats. I mean, maybe I missed it, but Dan Goldman seems fine so far to be used as like the poster child of quote unquote anti-Semitism. Yeah.
No, this is a preview of what will happen when Josh Shapiro is forced to drop out of the primary, or Rahm Emanuel, but especially Josh Shapiro. They're just going to play the victim, and they're going to be embraced by Republicans and neocons. And, you know, you saw James Carville calling for a schism of the Democrats with Democrats who don't support Israel's quote unquote right to exist. Here's Meghan McCain, who's just been all over this. To my beautiful Jewish friends in America, we love you. You are not alone. We are just as freaked out as you, and see with clear eyes exactly what is happening. What is happening? Brad Lander, the milquetoast Tikkun Olam progressive Zionist, won, and it's crystal knocked. And I guess we're not beautiful, according to her. Well, this is only to my beautiful Jewish friends. Just complete hysteria. She's trying to suggest that, you know, camps are being built. What we see exactly what's happening. This is one of the most unhinged responses I've seen. It's that lady Lizzie Savetsky, who's part of the 7K cartel, paid propagandist for the apartheid state of Israel. Hey, NYC, this is war. Diplomacy is dead. It's time to play dirty. So time for like Meyer Kahana tactics.
You know, I'm honestly
sorry to subject you all to this.
This is very undignified for us to play. I mean, you know,
Really relieved by these election results from last night. Let me tell you what I mean. You know, for so long, I think people have thought we could just continue to pander, to placate our way to victory, that everything would just be fine, be nice. Now we see that this whole time, the wheels have been spinning their way right into a pro-jihad, socialist, Jew-hating society. And that's what I'm going home to. Going home to a city where the victory party for a primary in New York City chants Free Palestine, joined by our New York City mayor, who then gives a celebratory speech, and everyone just acts like it's normal to be chanting genocidal things about Jewish people.
Free
New
Palestine
York City
is a genocidal
largest
thing.
population of Jews outside of Israel. Yeah, it is time
Very articulate.
for gloves off. Look at how many billions of dollars our Jewish legacy organizations have wasted fighting anti-Semitism. Look where it's gotten us. Look at New York City. Look at what we have just elected in the Democratic primary. Look at these politicians who are just too scared to take a stand. Did it serve them? No. Unless you count Brad Lander, who is an anti-Zionist Jew. I have a message for you, Brad. You know, the self-hating Jews were also gassed at Auschwitz. Anyway, anyone who has been asleep until now, I hope you're awake, because it's war and we need to start fighting dirty.
those billions of dollars that she complains were wasted fighting anti-Semitism, she's right about that. They were wasted. All that money should be invested in mental health treatment, forced confinement for people like her to get help, honestly, to deal with this. I'm really tired of talking about like Jewish culture and because it's so played out at this point, and the only issue, the only context in which I care about anymore is in terms of Palestine. But if they were honest about Jewish life in America, what they'd say is, wow, this is unbelievable. Yep. Like we went from being the subject of an extermination campaign 80 years ago during the Nazi Holocaust to now being incredibly privileged and accomplished, and like Jewish people have had all these achievements and occupy really high status in society, are incredibly privileged. This is a huge achievement, but instead it's all about self-victimization and doubling down and hatred. It's just and again, and you've made this point often, this is what Israel thrives on. Israel justifies its existence by promoting anti-Semitism, by promoting this belief that Jews are always under threat, or else the Israeli state wouldn't have a reason to justify its existence. So Zionism thrives on all this paranoia and self-victimization, but it's just so tiresome to watch and to be a part of.
Yeah. And I mean, these are the loudest voices representing the Jewish institutions, which have basically banished us anti-Zionists, representing, they define themselves as the Jews when they're only representing Zionism on social media. And so people who, are just observers, Gentiles, see that and say, well, the Jews they must be really crazy, because they're conflating themselves with Israel and owning all of its crimes.
Yeah.
This class of Zionist fanatics and cultists, they're in their own private Masada right now inside New York. It's a fortress of lies. Yeah. And they will do everything they can to prevent Jewish life from being normalized in the US. They cannot allow themselves to accept that they live in a golden age with unbridled privilege, unprecedented power, disproportionate power, total protection.
Yeah.
And that if if someone says online that they shouldn't have been given a coffee and they get a refund for a coffee, then protests will break out at that coffee shop. Yeah. That's what they're existing in. If they acknowledge that as a golden age, their identity starts to unravel as Zionists, because there's no longer a need for a Jewish sanctuary, in a supposed Jewish sanctuary in occupied Palestine that's occupying millions of people and holding them under siege in order to maintain the demographic advantage over the indigenous people. That's in a permanent state of war, an 8-front war with its neighbors and a war in the United States. There's no need for it if you acknowledge that, hey, things are actually better here. There aren't, mass suicide. There isn't as Haaretz reported, a mass mental health crisis like you have in Israel, because so many of them participated in the genocide that they've gone even crazier than they already are. Life isn't that good for Jews in Israel. It's much better here, but they can't acknowledge it. So they have to at least create the illusion of insecurity. But to the extent that that illusion fails, as it increasingly is, then they have to take the gloves off and make that illusion a reality. And so when she talks about taking the gloves off, what does that actually mean? It could mean actually just more hoaxes and fabrications in order to perpetuate anti-Semitism.
Yeah, like as if they haven't already taken off the gloves by like deporting people for their free
censoring
speech.
people.
Censoring people, getting people fired across the country. I mean, I just did an event in Toronto with a professor, Dr. Sabrina Siddiqui, who was fired from her position in Toronto because she called out Jewish supremacy and she supported the right of Palestinians to resist for their freedom. So she was fired. I mean, you can replicate that over and over and over and over and over. So now they're talking about taking off the gloves. Like, what more could you possibly do? You know, look what they did. They bought CBS, the Ellisons, the pro-Israel Ellisons bought CBS News, installed the pro-Israel activist Barry Weiss, who's like, you know, gutted the news organization, shamed it, but they don't care because their cause is Israel. They're going to do the same thing to CNN, which they're going to acquire because it was approved. You know, it's so I don't know what more they could possibly do.
Well, they can definitely do more. And as Zionism continues to unravel and kind of the credibility gets stripped away, like the new coating on the reflecting pool on the National Mall, I think we're going to see them escalate and continue to expose themselves. And, you know, my fear is that the violence that they apply in the region with assassinations or turning household communication devices into exploding weapons of war will start to seep into our own society. That's my fear. And, you know, hopefully it won't be realized. In many ways, it already has. The effort to paint what happened in New York as the face of the Democratic Party, I mean, that's going to backfire because there's a new Quinnipiac poll out showing that over 70% of Democratic voters want to suspend aid or end aid to Israel.
Max,
yeah,
I'm not sure if it's just me, but I'm having a hard time hearing you. So maybe something like with your microphone.
Check.
Okay, it sounds better now. And maybe in the comments, let us know if you heard the same thing or if it's just me. But yeah, it sounds fine now.
Does it sound better now?
Yeah, better now. It's good.
Okay. Well, there's a new Quinnipiac poll showing that a record number of Americans, Democrats and Republicans, oppose aid to Israel and think that the current level of support for Israel is not right and that it should be reduced. Overall, it's 48% who think it should be reduced. But if you break down the numbers of Democrats, it's just like almost the entire party's voter base wants to suspend or end aid to Israel and military aid. So in many ways, the candidates that Mamdani endorsed were giving the people what they wanted. And I don't know how they're going to get around this in the Democratic primary, except to kind of just emphasize social issues and just avoid this issue. And so, the best thing we can do is kind of force the issue as much as possible. And it's not going away.
Yeah, and they're going to face the next, or one of the next big tests of this will be in Michigan, where Abdul al-Sayed is running in the Senate primary, and it looks like he's going to win. And the attacks on him have been unbelievable. Like one of his opponents is
McMorrow.
McMorrow, who recently tried to like link Hassan Piker, who's a popular streamer who's been campaigning very, openly for Abdul al-Sayed. She tried to link him to the recent attempted attack on the Temple Israel Synagogue in Michigan, which actually had nothing to do, of course, with Hassan Piker. That was by a Lebanese man who lost family in Lebanon to Israel.
Yep.
And so, so Abdul al-Sayed's opponent, McMorrow, the state senator, tried to somehow link his campaign to that attack, and because, on totally fake ground. So they're getting desperate, and if he wins, that will be another huge, huge blow because Michigan is a much more pivotal state in a national election than New York. So that's really that really will just reinforce that what you're seeing in New York is not just confined to like traditionally like leftist enclaves, but has broader implications as well.
Yeah, and then there's the other candidate, the one who said Israel comes to her in her dreams, who's endorsed by Schumer.
Yeah. Yeah, and then should we talk about Schumer? Like, what does this result in New York say for Schumer? New York just rejected AIPAC.
Yep.
And Chuck Schumer is the leader of the Senate caucus for Democrats, and his own home base, his own city, just rejected his entire agenda. His agenda, which he said is his job is to ensure aid to Israel. He recently marched in that hate rally by the Ku Klux Klan in New York City for Israel Day.
Yep.
Alongside
Bezalel Smotrich.
Bezalel Smotrich, yeah. Is Chuck Schumer tenable in that position? He's got to be feeling the heat even more now in the aftermath of these victories of the sweep by Mamdani. And you got to say, look, Mamdani could have come into office and just sat on his laurels and like rode the wave of being mayor and focused on just his own agenda, which, he took a step forward with today because he pushed through a rent freeze for 1 million people. He could have just focused on that, but he didn't. He challenged incumbents, which, there's an unwritten rule which you're not supposed to do, and he won. So I think you have to credit it for that. And some people say he should have gone bolder with more challenges, but whatever. I mean, 3 victories is pretty impressive, and it sends a pretty big message, especially to the people who need to hear it, which is Hakeem Jeffries, who's also from New York.
AIPAC Shakur
and Chuck Schumer.
Yeah, this is just in closing. This is Chuck Schumer's the candidate that Chuck Schumer has chosen to endorse in Michigan, who, by the way, is not Jewish, just for the record.
And in the United States Congress, I will continue to fight for the people of Israel. I will continue to fight for Israel's existence. Israel comes to me in my dreams. I see Israel's future, and I know that Israel will continue to exist.
Yes. I kind of don't want her to go away though, because she's so entertaining unintentionally. And then there's the other lady, Mallory McMorrow, who hired some black marching band so that she could enter, and she impersonated Kamala's performance. She's kind of in second in Michigan, but these are just such bizarre figures. They're such poor retail politicians. They're so unappealing. They're bizarre. They're corny. They're cringeworthy. And those are who the Democratic Party leadership has chosen to support and throw their money behind. It's really the worst party in human history as far as just pure retail politics. And, I mean, look at the candidates they put up in the last 2 presidential campaigns. Last few.
Yeah.
Kamala, who was always on some strange happy pills. Joe Biden, who was demented, and then Hillary Clinton, who is just one of the most unlikable war criminals. And that's the best they can do. So this is all kind of inevitable. And I think Mamdani just kind of has his finger on the pulse and understood that, and there were clearly focus groups. He knew these candidates were going to win. I think the only one that was maybe on the fence was Chevalier, when she managed to eke out a win.
Chevalier, who once tweeted F Kamala Harris.
Yeah, that's like a campaign ad.
And they tried to use that against her, but it ended up, it certainly didn't cost her the election because she won. And it's pretty amazing that you ought to admire that. He chose to go, he could have gone with someone, I think, quote unquote, safer, but he chose someone who recently said F Kamala Harris. And
this is a poster by one of her opponents, but it looks like an ad for her. This is what we want. This is what people want. I don't really know her. It's not like I've,
I find her impressive from everything I've seen. One of the guys on Pod Save America tried to make an issue. He's like, she went to an anti-Israel rally on October 8th. Can you imagine that?
But I can pull that up.
Okay, yeah. She seems very principled to me, and she also has said things about the Ukraine proxy war that are totally reasonable, but you're not allowed to say in the Democratic Party, but simply just talking about the U.S. role in provoking Russia. But anyway, so here's John Favreau of Pod Save America. Let's watch a bit of this.
This is like one of the few podcasts I hate watch.
To ever win a Democratic primary in our lifetime. There's been a lot of focus on her old tweets, which she has deleted and mostly apologized for. I'm fine with that. My general position is to give people a chance who want to take back something they said or posted. Certainly would love to take back.
They all talk like that. It's like this certain corporate delivery they all have.
Things that I've posted. Here's where I have a problem. She has not apologized for attending an anti-Israel rally on October 8th, 2023, a rally that was condemned by Zoran Mamdani, AOC, and Brad Lander. The other problem I have.
All right, that's enough.
She sat for an interview with the.
I remember when AOC condemned that, and then we published Jeremy Lafredo at a pro-Israel rally when they were just basically like calling for killing everyone and leveling Gaza and murdering Muslims. And so she posted that. It was like the first time and only time AOC posted a Grayzone piece. And she's like, we just need to be against the bigotry on both sides. Okay. But by October 8th, Israel had already killed 445 people. Like I was in the State Department challenging Matthew Miller, who was screaming at me because I was saying Israel is going to commit genocide. Are you ready to support that? And they were like, yeah, we're on board.
Yeah, Israelis were openly saying they're going to commit a genocide. They were talking about the people of Gaza as animals and talking about depriving them of food and medicine. So
Nakba 2.0.
Yeah, and so a rally on October 8th was there to express solidarity with occupied Palestinians and to oppose the coming genocide. So she should be praised actually for going to that rally. As you know, she also was an organizer at the encampments at Columbia University. And it's amazing. She's going to go from being arrested at the encampments, the anti-genocide encampments at Columbia, and arrested on the orders of Columbia to now representing Columbia in Congress because Columbia, I think, is in her district. It's a pretty amazing trajectory. And yeah, I mean, look, for this clip from John Favreau, it signifies that people who come from that wing, from like the Obama wing, they have distinguished themselves by being more critical of Israel than some of their counterparts. But that clip there shows that their solidarity with Palestine is actually tested by people who put themselves on the line and have been uncompromising in supporting Palestinian self-determination. And by the way, when he says she should apologize, these guys, I remember when Trump launched his first coup attempt against Nicolas Maduro and tried to install Juan Guaido.
Yeah.
These Pod Save guys cheered it, said, we don't necessarily like how Trump does things, but we do support removing Maduro. So these people have been on side with Donald Trump as he tries to carry out regime change abroad. So tend to your own home before throwing stones at others. You know what I mean? But anyway, this will be interesting, and this will be the kind of attacks that Chevalier and these other progressive candidates who just won are going to get going forward from their own party.
Yeah, well, I'm enjoying the meltdown. I don't really know how much of a difference they'll make. I don't believe the Democratic Party is a vehicle for change, but I'm just going to enjoy this moment because there isn't much to enjoy. I've been on camera for 2.5 hours, so I'm going to wrap up here unless there's anything you want to add.
Thanks for being here, everybody. Like the stream, share the stream, support the Grayzone.
Yeah, thanks a lot to the Grayzone front line, Anya Parampil, Oscar Leon, Wyatt Reed, Kit Klarenberg, and as always, Aaron Mate. Thanks for being here, and thank you all for supporting us in any way you see fit. Sign up at Substack, support that Patreon on our site. There's a support button, or you can just send moral support. We'll see you all next week. Peace.